All this food's fine, you know. I'm going to eat it all.
So like I said, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Joe. I'm employed by a company called Dillon Bass, which is essentially part of a bigger company called Irish Distillers Pernod Ricard, and we're the biggest producers and brand owners of Irish whiskey. So just to name you some of our brands, Jameson, Powers, Spots, Method Madness, Midleton Very Rare, and big portfolio of Irish whiskies. And I manage and act as an ambassador for a lot of these brands. So I work on the Prestige brand, so my official title is Prestige Irish Whiskey Developer. So really kind of like your Midleton, your Redbreast, your Method Madness, etc. And then some of your high-end, more premium bars. So my job is to go about the place and do things like this. Talk about whiskey. It is a real job, believe it or not. I do get paid to do this. But essentially just trying to educate people on Irish whiskey, talking through our brands, and just encourage more people to get into it. So all the whiskies that you're going to be tasting and all the whiskies that I recommend are from Midleton Distillery. So that's the name of our distillery. A lot of these brands, for example, Powers and Jameson would have began their lives in Dublin. So you might see references to Dublin on old packaging and old labels. But what happened was in the 1960s, Irish whiskey was in a very bad position, to be honest. It came very close to disappearing altogether. So what happened was three competitors, which would have been John Power and Son, John Jameson and Son, and the Cork Distilleries Company, Paddy Whiskey, decided that it was safer to join up together. And in 1966, they formed Irish Distillers, and they closed down their Dublin distilleries and moved production into a brand new, much more modern, purpose-built facility in Cork. So that's where we've been making our whiskies since. So we don't make whiskey in Dublin anymore. We do actually mature a little bit in Bow Street in Dublin, but all, the rest of our whiskies are all distilled in Cork, in Midleton Distillery. And the distillery is named after the town of Midleton. It's a population of roughly about 30,000 people, quite a small town, and then there's just this massive distillery in the middle of it that makes a massive amount of Irish whiskey. Anybody ever been to the distillery? I know some of you probably have. Yeah, you guys would have. If you haven't been, I would always recommend anybody to get down there. Even if you don't like whiskey, which I guess you obviously do, otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's just a really amazing experience if you want to go there for the tour and just to see the place. We actually are investing significantly in the tour experience, so hopefully it's only going to get better over the next few years. But it is the largest distillery in Ireland, and it's about 10 minutes east of Cork City. So, it is a bit of a drive. It's probably about 5 hours, 5.5 hours, but absolutely worth doing. So down in Midleton, we make a number of different styles of whiskey. The one that I'm going to talk about the most is single pot still, because it's pretty much going to be in the DNA of all of these whiskies. I will touch on some of the other ones, but single pot still is kind of what we're known for. For a long time, we were the only people still producing single pot still. That isn't the case anymore. We now have an explosion, obviously, as some of you know, of new distilleries on the island. So we're around over 40 distilleries at the moment, and a lot of them are actually starting to recreate pot still or make their own pot still. So we're starting to see a bit of a resurgence of this style, and we're starting to see a lot of styles and mash bills that haven't really been seen in Ireland for well over 100 years. So I think we're at the cusp of a much more interesting period for Irish whiskey. But single pot still is kind of what we're known for at Midleton. So it's completely unique to Ireland. No other country in the world makes single pot still Irish whiskey. It's a geographical indication, so it's protected. So, you can't have some guys in America making single pot still Irish whiskey. I'm sure some of you have probably seen there's been an online debate over the last week or so. It's getting pretty heavy about a distillery I will not name that was using some Irish language to describe their whiskey. So it is protected. You can't go ahead and make single pot still Irish whiskey. It's reserved for us in Ireland. Same way champagne comes from Champagne, or Comfort potatoes come from Comfort. The exact same idea. It has to be from Ireland. So the main cereal for us to actually make our whiskey. And before I tell you about single pot still, let me tell you what whiskey is, in case some of you don't know. Whiskey is just a distilled spirit made from cereal. So wheat, barley, rye, maize, oats, those are the types of cereals we're going to use. It's ground up, soaked in water, fermented into a type of beer. That beer is then distilled into a spirit. That spirit is then aged in a barrel, and X amount of years later you have your whiskey. And the reason that our whiskey tastes different to the whiskey you made on the North Coast, or Scotland, or America, or Japan, is you have a lot of different variables you can control. So you can use different types of cereal, you can use different types of stills, you can use different types of barrels, you can age for different lengths of time. This is what gives you this big kind of plethora of different flavours, and that's why all of our whiskies taste quite different. So for us, the main cereal that we use is barley, and you probably can't see, that's what it looks like. It's probably the most boring part of the tasting, it's literally just the seeds. But this is what we use to make our whiskey. It is not coriander, it's a jar, might lead you to believe. But this is mostly what Irish and Scottish distilleries will actually use to make their whiskey. The reason we use it in Ireland, or the reason that we originally started using it, was because it grows here. It's always grown really, really well in the Irish climate. Today being a bit of an exception, how would you describe the weather in Ireland? Usually it's either wet or crap, but yeah, both depend on what mood you're in. Yeah, it's wet a significant amount of the year, and it never gets too hot, never gets too cold for the moment, which is pretty much perfect for growing barley. So that's the reason, historically we would have used it. The other reason that it's used is it is honestly just one of the best cereals for making whiskey. Really, really resistant to bacteria, pretty easy to grow, really high starch content. It's pretty much perfect for making whiskey. So that's the reason that we use it. So one of the reasons Ireland and Scotland are so good for making whiskey is because the weather's pretty crap most of the time. This is malted barley. So what happens is all the barley is grown, it's then harvested, and it's sent to a malting company. They put it through a simple 3-step process. It's soaked in water, it's allowed to germinate or grow, so it actually sprouts, and then it's just dried. So we use hot, dry air. So if you're a fan of peated whiskey, and what they'll do typically in some places in Scotland, they'll burn peat or turf from the smoke will dry barley and give it that kind of phenolic, smoky flavour. Don't worry if you don't like that. You're not going to find any of these flavours in these whiskies. It's not something that we do in Midleton. It is done occasionally in Ireland. You're starting to see new distilleries that are using peat, and there's at least one man in the room who's giving me some peated samples. But yeah, there is going to be more and more peated whiskies. But it's not something typically done in Midleton, so we're not interested in smoky flavours. We're more kind of about sweet, spicy, floral, aromatic flavours. Absolutely nothing wrong with peated whiskey. Anyone who knows me well will know I actually quite love peated whiskey, but it's typically not really what we're known for. So once the malting process is finished, this is what we end up with. So this is just your malted barley. If I was to take this and make a whiskey, what I would have is a malt whiskey. Now, we're not really known for malt whiskey at Midleton, we're more known for our single pot still. So we actually combine malted and non-malted barley together, and this is what makes it unique. So the combination of malted barley that's been put through that 3-step process, and then unmalted barley, so just completely green barley, hasn't been processed at all. The reason that we do this is because it actually changes the flavour and the texture of the whiskey. So single pot still whiskey is really characterised by being very rich and creamy and a little bit spicy. So when I say spicy, sometimes you mean like a freshly cracked black pepper, or sometimes some cooking spice, and you're definitely going to find those flavours, particularly in the likes of the powers here, and especially even the likes of these Redbreast. You're going to get that really rich creaminess and kind of an intensely spicy character as well. So that's the reason we do it. We just really like the flavour profile of whiskey. So what happens is we mix our malted and non-malted barley together, grind it all up, soak it in water and ferment it. We add yeast and ferment it. So essentially what we're doing right now is we're brewing a beer. And we add in the yeast. Yeast is a living organism, so it eats all of the sugar, and as it eats it, it produces carbon dioxide and alcohol. So that's fermentation. Fermentation is responsible for the best things we have in life, like whiskey, wine, beer, cheese, meat, bread. Fermentation is fast. But essentially what happens then is the yeast eats the sugar, produces the alcohol, and produces carbon dioxide as well. We don't need that, so we just siphon it off. And what we're left with is a beer. Now, the distillery will call it wash, but it is essentially a beer. Our pot still comes out roughly about 8 to 10% ABV, and it's quite strong. Obviously not strong enough yet to be called whiskey, so the next stage is we actually distill. And no surprises, the type of still we use to make single pot still out of whiskey is called a pot still, so that's where the term comes from. The pot stills that we have in Midleton are the biggest working pot stills in the world, and if you ever get a chance to see them, it is pretty breathtaking. They're huge, roughly about 80,000 litres capacity. At least 3 or 4 times the height of this building. And the reason they're so big is because we make a lot of whiskey. I don't know if anyone read recently, but we hit the 10 million case mark on Jameson. So we needed a lot of supply to meet that demand, essentially. So that's why we have some big stills, that's why we have multiple of them. So distillation is actually pretty simple. It's just separating the water and the alcohol. Water boils at 100 degrees, alcohol is about 78 degrees. So what you want to do is heat up your wash, allow the alcohol to evaporate, capture it, and recondense it back into a liquid, and then repeat the process. And that's essentially distillation. So the more you repeat it, the higher the alcohol you get. And for us at Midleton, almost all of our whiskey is triple distilled. A few exceptions, but almost all of it will be triple distilled. So we put it through one distillation, we then repeat the process, and we repeat it again. And typically at the moment, most Irish whiskey is triple distilled. There are exceptions. You can get double distilled Irish whiskey and you get triple distilled Scottish whiskey, so there's no rules about it. But as a rule of thumb, generally at the moment, most Irish will be triple distilled. So if you ever see triple distilled on a bottle and wondered what it meant, 3 different distillations. It does mean we do get quite a strong spirit at the end, and this is what it looks like. Anybody can ever tell me where the word whiskey comes from? Yeah. I'd be very surprised if nobody in this room could answer that question for me. Ishkaba, so literally, this is what the Irish and Scottish monks would call the runic spirit, what came off the stills. Water of life. This is what it looks like. It does look like water. I assure you it absolutely is not water. It's about 84.4% alcohol. And this is LPM. So we have different distillates for different whiskies. So for example, Jameson uses a different distillate, which is a bit lighter, a bit more floral. This is maybe a bit more intense, but more full-bodied. And it's down to our master distiller to control the process and decide what distillates are going into each whiskies. So for example, when you're tasting the Powers, when you're tasting the Midleton, you're tasting the Redbreast, these do not all start off necessarily as the same. And we're going to make whiskey essentially. So the next step is to put this into a barrel. And before we do that, we actually do reduce the alcohol. And so if I was to put 84% of the alcohol, it actually damages the wood and makes the whiskey taste bad. It's called cask burn. So we water it down to stop that from happening, and also to minimise the angel share. So the angel share is just the amount of liquid that we lose through evaporation, and it's quite a lot. It's roughly about 2% for us out of each cask in a year. So 2% out of each cask. It doesn't really sound like much until you add it all up and consider how long we mature the whiskey. Some of you will know the answer to this, so don't spoil it if you do. Does anybody want to have a guess of how many bottles we lose in one day through the angel share? Too many, yeah. A lot, yeah, a lot. It's about 40,000 roughly at the moment. Now that was the answer 6 months ago. I'd say it could even be more than that now. You guys do up production of it, and it's going to be more than that moving forward. Roughly 40,000 bottles a day are lost to the angel share. So they're very, very happy. That's important, yeah. You go down there and you wonder, do they all sound funny and they're in such a good mood? Like this is just the whiskey in the air. Yeah, and there's nothing really we can do to stop it, unfortunately. There's been all kinds of experiments to try and prevent it, but the angels will always get their share. The best we can do is minimise it. And I should mention as well is that's the Irish climate, so 2% is not too bad. If you live in a hotter climate, you're going to lose more than 2%. So you go to like Louisiana, Kentucky, etc., they're going to lose more. Caribbean, they're losing a lot more than 2%. So again, crap weather is great for making whiskey. You don't lose as much. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce it down to roughly about 65% and then put it into the cask. Now, the main cask for us used at Midleton is an American ex-bourbon barrel. And this is half the stave from a bourbon barrel. So you can picture it kind of coming up my waist. You probably walk past them in bars all the time. But bourbon is just a type of whiskey made in America. And like Irish whiskey, there are certain rules about how you make it. So the one that's relevant to us is they build their casks out of white oak, Quercus alba, and they then char the inside of it completely black. You can see they put a flame in there and char it. And the reason they're charring it is this is just a really dense wood, very, very dense, really, really tight grain structure. And if you don't char it, you just don't get flavour. You don't get as much flavour. So by charring it, what we do is you just open up the wood, open up the pores in the wood slightly, and actually caramelise the sugar. So there's just natural sugar in American oak. And when you char it, you caramelise some of that sugar, and you get a lovely sweetness. So what they'll do in America is they'll build the casks, char them, fill them up with their spirit, which for bourbon, which will be at least 51% corn, and usually some maize, some malt barley in there as well. And they mature their whiskey, bottle it, sell it, and then that barrel cannot be used again to make bourbon. Bourbon is always produced in a brand new charred barrel. So what we do then is we purchase them off the Americans. The Americans haven't worked out, you get a lot more than one use out of a barrel. So the fact that it's already been used once is actually really good for us because you get loads of sweetness. Like if you ever drink bourbon, and I do like bourbon, it tends to be a good bit sweeter than like Irish or Scottish whiskey. The market here doesn't like as much sweetness, so they get a lot of that first contribution, which is going to give you loads of that sweetness. By the time it arrives in Ireland, it's kind of toned it down slightly, so it's seasoned the cask a bit. So it arrives in Ireland, we'll then use it typically 3 times. First time, you get a massive contribution of flavour. Second time, a little bit less, and then third time, a little bit less. And that's kind of after that when we're done. So whenever you're going out here and you're walking through city centre later, you see a bourbon barrel, or a barrel comes up from you out there, it almost certainly has been used to make whiskey. It served its purpose, lived its life, it's then been branded up and gone to a bar. So that's it. And typically what you're going to get from bourbon is honey, caramel, vanilla, really. And actually, the first whiskey you'll be tasting in just a moment is a first fill bourbon barrel, so you're going to really get a good example of some of these flavors. That's the main cask. The second one used for us, most commonly used one, is a Spanish Oloroso sherry butt. Anybody who knows me will know I'm a big fan of sherry. Very tragically underappreciated style of wine. Everybody thinks it's just, that blue bottle comes out once a year. There's a whole world of sherry that is unexplored. But what happens is, I'll tell you what sherry is. Sherry is a fortified wine from the south of Spain. So Jerez de la Frontera, Puerto de Santa Maria, and San Lugar de Barrameda make up a wee triangle, so 3 towns. And inside the sherry triangle is where all sherry has to be produced. The same way that single possible Irish whiskey comes from Ireland, sherry has to be in the sherry triangle. It's protected. So there's lots of different styles. The most common one is your Fino, which is like your Tio Pepes, your really dry white sherries. You've got the likes of your Amontillados, your Olorosos. You go to the very far end of the scale, you have your Pedro Jimenez, which is like luscious and sweet. And for us, we use Oloroso. So what happens is they make the wine out of the Palomino grape in Spain. They then fortify it with distilled alcohol. So they fortify it, they raise the strength, and bring it up to closer to 18 to 20%. That's what a fortified wine is. So Sherry, Madeira, Marsala, Malaga. Anybody think of another one? Buckfast, yeah. Okay. So always one person says Buckfast. So they fortify it. What happens then is casks are seasoned with the sherry for 12 to 18 months. So they're done specifically for us. They're filled up with this Oloroso sherry, left in there for 12 to 18 months, emptied out, and then the casks are then purchased and sent over to Ireland. We use them to mature our whiskey as well. Those are by far the most commonly used barrels that we use at Midleton. There's loads of other ones. We use beer casks, red wine, chestnuts. We just use Mizunari, Japanese oak. Over 45 different types of wood we use currently at Midleton. But only 3 are going to be used for these whiskies. So we get your American ex-bourbon, your Spanish Oloroso sherry, and then we actually do have some Irish oak as well. There's some Irish oak hogsheads in this Midleton. But those are the 3 main casks. So what happens is it goes into the barrel, and then we just have to be very patient, wait as long as it takes. Legally 3 years is the minimum. You're going to be tasting whiskies a lot older than that. So we're going to be starting with a 14, we're going to be finishing with a 25. So these whiskies do have quite a bit of age to them. Older doesn't always mean better, but in this case it definitely does, because these whiskies are all glass. And there is a certain level of complexity that comes with these. So I'm really keen to see what you think. That's essentially it. The only other thing that might happen is we'll reduce the ABV again before we bottle it. So for example, this one here is bottled at 46%. And typically we would find like our premiums, like some of our single casks, your Redbreast, 15s, 21s, yellow spots, etc. will typically bottle those at 46. Because generally the people that drink them want that extra little bit of alcohol. It gives a bit more weight to the spirit, carries a little bit more flavour arguably. Or in some cases, we don't reduce it at all, we bottle it at cask strength. So we are going to be tasting some cask strength whiskey. If you've never had cask strength whiskey before, obviously it will have a bit of a kick to it. The thing is, don't take a big sip and immediately swallow it, because you really want to chew it, let it sit in your palate for a few minutes. So guys, that being said, that's essentially a very quick whistle-stop tour of how we make whiskey. Like I said, I always saying in advance, apologies, you have to listen to me talk a wee bit. But I think now when we go taste these whiskies, if you didn't know that story, you maybe understand the process a little bit more. So guys, thank you for all coming down. One of the things I wanted to mention tonight is, as well as doing this event, we've actually completely relaunched Whiskey Club. So Whiskey Club is our platform, so it's a bit of a shared community for people who love Irish whiskey, people who love our brands. We rebuilt the website recently, so it's been about 6 months in the making. Please check it out, whiskyclub.com. We also rebranded on social media, so we've a new look and feel. Facebook flagged us for a violation and deleted our Instagram page, something like 2,000 followers. We've had 3 consultations and they've all admitted that no fault was committed, but we just can't get the page back up. So we've had to make a new page. It's Whiskey Club NI _. If you're not already following us, please go on there, give us a follow, share our posts. We're still committed to doing monthly events, monthly giveaways, monthly competitions. I've got a calendar of stuff happening over the next 6 months. So the best way to hear about it is to sign up to the newsletter and follow us on social media. So again, thank you guys, and thank you. There's nobody from Friend
So Marty, this is Korean style chicken sandwich with coleslaw. Are Julie and you envious? I think you are. Catch you.